You may be seated. So this week I was at an event at the David Koch Theater. It was an APAC event, and they performed a piece of jazz music known as King David's Suite, composed by Lionel Hampton. And I'll be honest with you, jazz, while I enjoy it, isn't something I truly understand. It's something of a different age. It's not the type of music that I was really raised on. But as you know, every generation claims that its music is the best music. And I can attest to that because I know the music my children listen to, and it's incomprehensible dreck. And I can say that with complete and absolute confidence because it makes no sense.
And they're not here.
No, I would say it to them. But my father used to say the same thing of the music I was raised on. The music that I grew up with, classic rock. Beatles, right? Rolling Stones, right? Not the Beach Boys so much, but with that said, everybody claims that their music is the best music. I don't know how there can be any argument, but I understand that there are those who believe that classic rock is really somewhat missing in its depth. There are those of the generation who were raised on Frank Sinatra, who claimed that was the real music. But the truth is that in every generation, right now we hear people saying it's true, it's true. But the truth is that in every generation, there are the thoughts that that generation is the best. And that the ones that preceded it and the ones that followed it weren't quite as measuring up. Tom Brokaw wrote an amazing book called The Greatest Generation, in which he claimed that the age of World War II, that generation was really the greatest generation in American history. And he followed that up with a series of examples of selflessness, of a sense of purpose, a sense of a vision of a future that's greater than their current circumstance. And he writes in his book, there on the beaches of Normandy, I began to reflect on the wonders of these ordinary people whose lives were laced with the markings of greatness. He saw within that generation greatness unlike what he had ever seen before and what he imagined would come afterwards. Every generation sees itself as the greatest contributor to the advancement of society since the beginning of civilization. And I tell you right now, the times in which we live, with the extraordinary advances in science and technology, I still pause to think about whether or not we are living in the greatest of times. Certainly, we lack the leadership of previous generations, regardless of the side of the aisle on which you sit. We lack leadership in a way that inspires as generations past did. But we have to stop looking towards the leadership and ask ourselves the question, what role are we playing? Are we of the greatest perspective ever, or have we fallen short of the mark ourselves? The days of pointing our fingers have to come to an end. Because every generation, I imagine, from the beginning of time, thought to themselves, we're near the end. This could be it. Will we wake up tomorrow? I was raised in a generation where we did drills, where we hid under our desks because we were afraid of a nuclear bomb. Because those wooden desks under which we hid were going to take care of us. I know. Those desks withstood a great deal. And I'm sure they would have withstood a bomb. But there's no question about it. We thought in those days that we were on the brink of nuclear warfare. And maybe those were the darkest days. But we've exceeded those dark times with lockdowns and shelter-in-place drills. This morning's Parsha says, no, they lived in the darkest times, not us. As I pointed out in the Torah this morning as we gathered around so I could point the location of the beginning of the Parsha, it showed that the Parsha began in the middle. It was a closed section, says the Torah. Say our rabbis that it's a closed section of the Torah because we've now come to a close in the ancestors of our people. With the death of Jacob, the inspirational leadership that was brought to us by Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob have now come to a close. The greatest generation had come to a conclusion. Vayechi Yaakov beretz Mitzrayim 17 shana. Jacob lived in Egypt 17 years. Vayehi me Yaakov shnei chayav 7 shanim ve'arba meot shana. Jacob's life ended at 147 years old. A ripe old age was the conclusion of the greatest generation of our people. The most inspirational people ever to walk this earth were Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. We call on them every time we begin the Amidah. On their merit ought God listen to our prayers. Because of who they were, because of the inspiration they brought, because of the gifts that they gave. Says the Torah, it's come to an end. And Rashi picks up on it. He says, Lama Parsha Zo Stuma. Why is this a closed section of the Torah? Lefi shekevan sheniftar Yaakov Avinu nistemu einehem v'libam shel Yisrael. That when they closed that chapter in our life, the Jewish people's hearts closed up. And they lacked a vision for a future that could be better. Because no longer would there ever walk the earth the likes of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. But he doesn't stop there. He says, "V'libam she Yisrael mitzarat she'ibud," because they could see Egyptian slavery coming. She'itchalu l'shib Adam, that the beginning of their enslavement had begun. And they could see it happening. The rapid decline and demise of our people into slavery, a bondage that would last for 100 years. The conclusion of the greatest generation would result in extraordinary enslavement. And so Rashi tells us, it's hard sometimes when the greats die, when there's no longer the leadership amongst us to inspire greatness. Rashi tells us we immediately fall into the dark demise, the very dark place of hopelessness. Says Rashi, because he's reading Midrash Breshit Rabbah, it seems as though the end is near. Mipnei she'ibud shebikesh Yaakov Avinu legalot et haketz v'nistam meimenu. Breshit Rabbah says Jacob asked on his deathbed, what's going to be? What's the next stage? What's the great accomplishments to come? V'nistem mi imenu. But it was hidden from him. He couldn't see a future that was better. He couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel. He couldn't imagine there were accomplishments still to be achieved. And so, Jacob dies, and he leaves the Jewish people hopeless. He leaves his children in a dark place. They may be experiencing the wonderment of a viceroy who is one of them, who has achieved one of the greatest stations in Egyptian life, but the end is near. Because in the beginning of next week's Parsha, it begins, Asher lo yadat Yosef, Vayakam melech chadash. A new king arose who had no idea who Joseph even was. And our slavery began. At Jacob's death, writes Aviva Zornberg, a fog settles over the hearts and eyes of the Jewish people. This purely internal sense of vital blockage is intensified. She, of course, is referring to an amazing statement by the Zohar. So let's pause for just a moment for me to tell you what the Zohar was. Written apparently by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, but made public by Moses de Leon in the late 13th century in Spain. The beginning of an extremely dark time for the Jewish people. This compilation of midrashim of hope and joy is brought to us because in the face of dramatic challenge and darkness, the Jewish response is to be joyful, to dance, to celebrate. And so the Zohar says, the eyes of Israel were closed because they lost their source of wisdom and they seemed to sense the impending joy, the impending slavery, because they descended into exile and were enslaved. That's what the Zohar said, but guess what? You know the end of the story. We don't end there. The Torah doesn't stop there. The Torah speaks to a time of liberation, of redemption. The Jewish people's story sometimes is dark, but it's never the end of the story. There is great hope in the future, says the Zohar, and it's a time to receive that great inspiration. We all want people to lift us up, to raise us up, to inspire us in moments of darkness. Says the Zohar, all you got to do is look to Torah, and you'll be inspired. You don't need someone to receive it for you and then transmit it to you. You can access it yourself. You can read the stories of our ancestors. After follows Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, there is a Joseph, there is a David, there is a Saul, there is a Solomon, there is a Devorah. Our literature is littered with people who inspire us. Maybe sitting amongst us is that next great leader. And from that we can find an inspiration. John F. Kennedy said, "Let the word go forth from this place and time, to friend and foe alike, that the torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans born in this century, tempered by war, disciplined by a hard and bitter peace." John F. Kennedy said in his inaugural speech in 1961, in a dark time in American history, John F. Kennedy brought us inspiration. Tom Brokaw speaks of the greatest generation. He says that in comparison to what came before and what might have followed immediately. Is it possible we're living in the greatest generation now? Be hard to make that case. Does it mean that we don't have in store for us a future of a much greater generation? No, it doesn't. It means that there is possibility on the future. So I say to you this morning, if we don't feel it as a nation, if we don't feel it as a country, at least individually, we can find it. You don't have to ascribe to the politics of anger that besiege our nation now. You can ascribe to the politics of joy, to the politics of response to enslavement by speaking liberation. In your own personal lives, you can say to yourself, I'm not going to respond to the people around me with anger and frustration, with hatred, but rather with joy and camaraderie. Radically open your hearts in a time where it's extremely hard, and you will find joy and happiness, and that will change the nature of our world. Shabbat Shalom.